Hello, and welcome back to The Land, a Borderline basketball podcast. I'm your host, Javier Cortez, and this is episode 7. So, on today's episode, it's a bit of a mixed bag. We're going to be recapping some of the game scores from the early week slate of games for week 2 on the girls' side, and going to be previewing some of the top matchups in week 1 of boys high school basketball, which will be tipping off tomorrow on Friday. But also getting into some other news, some content that I will be producing and coming out with at the end of this month. So a bit of a mixed bag episode. Again, these kind of in-season episodes, I'm still trying to figure out more or less how I want to do it. What times should I go live or not go live? And, what days will really work the best for that. So, I don't really know if kind of midweek is where these episodes are going to ultimately land. Probably makes the most sense to do these on a Saturday or a Sunday. But as the season gets going, boys and girls side, and I think once we get into district play, I'll probably get a bit of a better format or structure for how we do these things. But first thing on the slate today, I wanted to talk about Kayla Thornton night at Irvin High School. This happened this past Tuesday, November 5th. So Kayla Thornton, everybody I think who follows basketball in the borderland knows who Kayla Thornton is. But for those who don't know, Kayla is a El Pasoan, a Irvin High School alumni, a UTEP alumni. She was a great high school and track athlete at Irvin High School. And then, of course, she went on to star for the UTEP women's basketball program, the best player in the program's history, holds just about every significant record. I've talked about this on previous episodes. And really, for the past decade, she's enjoyed a really successful WNBA career as an undrafted player coming out of college, which is really hard to do on the pro side, on the women's side, simply because there's just not as many teams in women's professional basketball in the United States. And she's, turned out to have an excellent career, has bounced around teams, but has always found a role. And just recently came off winning her first world championship with the New York Liberty in a really interesting, fun, highly competitive back and forth WNBA finals against the Minnesota Lynx. It was the first title in the history of the New York Liberties franchise. So really a big moment, I think, for women's professional basketball to have a big market team like the Liberty with a lot of great players like Brianna Stewart, Sabrina Ionescu, winning titles and being at the forefront of that. And Kayla was a pivotal role player for the Liberty. Came off the bench consistently all throughout the season, started a few games, spot up 3-point shooter, versatile defender. She was on the floor at the end of game 5 as the Liberty won that championship in thrilling fashion. And so with that, she was honored by Irvin High School on November 5th in Irvin's home opener against Anthony High School. And she's going to be honored at UTEP in their, I believe, home opener or second home opener this weekend. So really big week for Kayla, but more or less I just want to focus on it from a Irvin High School perspective, being that this is a high school basketball podcast for the most part. And so I was there for that game. I stayed for as long as I could until I had to go to East El Paso. And although it was not heavily attended, it was a respectable turnout for her ceremony. And as somebody who's from Northeast El Paso, somebody who went to Irvin High School, I went to high school with Kayla. She was 2 years ahead of me, but I remember her very well back then, watched her play a lot, shared some of the same spaces within the student council room. And it was just, I think for me and a lot of people who are from Northeast El Paso who went to Irvin, it was a very proud moment because I've talked about this on past episodes. Northeast El Paso is a historically underserved community that has to deal with a lot of negative stereotyping and doesn't get a lot of citywide support. And same goes for Irvin High School and in a lot of ways in terms of how it's been divested and kind of abandoned from a population standpoint. So to me, to see a professional player come back and to watch the girls on the Irvin team and the girls on the Anthony team just to get to see her and her to talk to those players on both sides, take photos with girls on the both sides was a really special moment. And I think just something that Northeast El Paso and Irvin High School really needed. I'm going to try to come out with a video kind of recapping the night, the ceremony. I conducted some interviews and shot some video that I hope to be putting out on the YouTube page later this week, maybe at the end of the week or early next week. My video editing skills are not very good, so it's taking me a while and I just have other stuff to do, but I'll be providing more on that night for people who didn't get to be there. But I do want to cut to just a little clip of Kayla speaking. It's about 2 minutes long, and just her talking about her journey and her appreciation to be honored, talked about her family, shared some funny quips, and I think you'll enjoy. So let's briefly cut to this, and then we'll come right back.
First of all, it's an honor to have everyone today. Thank God, I would give thanks to God for just allowing me to be here. I'm going to make so excuse me, but there's a lot of people that I can thank and stuff, and starting from my coaches in Highlands, middle school, all the way up to my college years, and even past that. I'm just so grateful to my teammates that I played along throughout the years. I hope they get better. Someone here, so she actually. To everybody, to my parents especially, that have sacrificed a lot for me to be where I am. The countless nights with swimming track and cross country and all that. Shout out to Costa Baggio. And I'm just really appreciative of my dad and my mom. I never allowed my mom to come to the games because she was just too loud. So, that kind of changed at Utah because we were in a bigger arena, so we couldn't hear it as much. But I'm appreciative to that, to my brothers that are not here, by supporting me and all that. But I do want to shout out to a few people that kind of been on the road with me that helped me through all this. And that's Eugene Costello, my trainer. Coach Ross, the one that introduced me to him after my high school year. I went to my freshman year in college, and Gene teach something to me that I finally see myself, and words can express how much I'm gratitude for him pushing me to be the player that I am. There's nights for retraining at times just late at night, and even though he teaches and coaches, he stayed up and helped me, and I'm just so thankful to him because without you guys, my coaches and all that, and him. I definitely want to be the player that I am tonight. So, and to be standing here with my, my jersey being retired at Irvin, it's heartwarming, and I'm just so grateful. And I have no words, but I can't express it because I just have so many emotions. But I'm just so grateful, and I thank you guys all for coming out and supporting.
So yeah, that was Kayla in her own words. Again, I thought it was very genuine, heartfelt, funny at times in her brief remarks. And again, it was just a very special night for Northeast El Paso, and it's not ending. So again, she's being honored at the Haskins Center, and I really just hope people can show up for that. So, by no means was I ever like friends or super close with Kayla, but I've known her since high school. I covered her in college, shared some of the same spaces. And what I can really, with a lot of confidence, say is that she's a very genuine, good person. When I think back to who she was in high school, she was a very silly, goofy, playful person. And just like a really good-hearted person too. No ego. That didn't change in college, even as she gained more notoriety and had a lot of success as a collegiate player. So this is just a really good, high character person. And, UTEP always celebrates and brings back legends every single year, season for various sports. And there's always varying degrees of support and people coming out for that. But I really hope that a lot of people come out in droves for Kayla, because not only is she a UTEP legend, she's from El Paso. She's an El Pasoan, and she's a really good person. So, I think it will send a really good message, if we come out and celebrate and support not only people who did really great at representing our university here, but just people who are from this city and just good people, high character people, because it would be really disappointing if it was done within an empty arena. So I really hope that, gets a lot of support. So hopefully collectively as a city, we can make up for, not really doing a good job of supporting her or the UTEP women's basketball program when they're at their zenith point and Keitha Adams' first tenure. Now is a good time to make up for it and show support for her and for those UTEP teams that she was so great in leading. So yeah, that's the Kayla Thornton day at Irvin High School. Also, Irvin, the girls won, so that was nice to see too. And it was just nice to kind of go back. It was my first time back on campus in the gymnasium in 12 years. I've been back to Irvin plenty times before, but not really on campus. So, it was a interesting moment for me too, to just be back there and kind of have some memories kind of rush back. And again, hopefully I can have a video out on that ceremony that night sometime next week, but we'll see with my poor video editing skills. Now, let's move on. Let's recap some of the early week games from early week 2 on the girls' side. So there was games on Monday night, games on Tuesday night, some really good non-district matchups, and then I'll get in depth on the 2 games that I went to and watched in depth, and I'll kind of give my feedback and analysis on those 2 games that I covered. The first game was on Monday night. Chapin was at Eastlake, and then Tuesday night, Burges went to Riverside. So I'll cover those 2 games in depth after we get to a general recap of these slate of games. Okay, so running through the early slate of games, and like I said, if you don't post your scores, you don't report your scores, you're not going to get coverage. So every team that reports scores, I try to do my best to find them and, have some type of commentary on them. And we have a good amount, I believe 14 here. So starting on the left-hand side, Franklin beat Bel Air 52-45, a good bounce back win for Franklin after losing their season opener to Americas. They beat a pretty solid Bel Air squad out of the 2-5A level. So good win for Franklin. Franklin is on the road. I believe they're in Dallas or somewhere in Central or East Texas for a tournament this weekend. Coronado got a 42-39 win over El Paso High. So Coronado's 2-0, beat an El Paso High team that won 24 games last season. So big win for the T-Birds. Eastlake beat Chapin 39-27. I'll save my comments for that later. Jefferson beat Harmony by 31 points. So nice win for Jeff. Parkland beat Ysleta 38-21 in a former 2-5A matchup. Not anymore, though, because Ysleta has moved down to 2-4A. Mountain View gets a win over Del Valle, so punching up a district weight class. Mountain View in the 2-4A, Del Valle in 2-5A. Irvin, of course, beat Anthony 71-16 on Kayla Thornton night. It was a pretty dominant win from start to finish for Irvin, and I believe they're 3-0 on the season, so good for the Lady Rockets. Off to a good start down in 1-4A basketball, and they beat I believe a 2-0 Anthony squad, and again, did it pretty convincingly with a 55-point win. Americas beats Montwood 53-43, a nice double-digit win for Americas. They beat a really solid Montwood squad. Again, former 1-6A foes. Americas now down at the 2-5A level, but, Americas is just as good as anybody in the borderland, whether they're 2-5A or 1-6A, doesn't matter. But also not a bad result for Montwood either. Yes, they lost by 10, but they're fairly competitive with an elite program in the Trailblazers. Socorro comes away with a 47-26 win over Canutillo. So it looks like maybe Canutillo is going to take a slight step back this season, although they have played, I believe they opened their season against, who was it, Eastwood. So, Eastwood's a tough matchup. Socorro didn't win a lot of games last year, but maybe they're going to be a little bit more improved this year. They had a close, low-scoring loss to Burges last week, so maybe we see a much more competitive Bulldog team this season. Pebble Hills with a 40-point win over Andrews. I just finished watching some of the tape highlights on that game, and man, Pebble Hills is going to be good. They just have really key, solid players at each important position, starting with Jordan Sapien. So the Spartans are going to be excellent this season. Eastwood, 25-point win over a solid Hanks team. Hanks isn't fully healthy. They're missing some key players, but they're still a really good squad. And Eastwood, again, they just showed why they're number one on the preseason power rankings, why they're one of the elite teams. Abby Ortega had an excellent game for the Troopers in this one. So Eastwood still undefeated in this early season. El Dorado picks up a win over Loretto, 46-23. Horizon beats Emmanuel Christian, 33-19. And then Clint, who, was 4 games over 500 last season, had a winning record, but didn't have a lot of roster turnover. I think this Clint team is going to be even better this season. They beat Austin 49-11. So that's the slate of games from early week 2. Now let's get into the games that I went out and covered more specifically, starting with Chapin at Eastlake. So Chapin traveled to East El Paso to face the Falcons. 1-0 on the season. I think going to be much improved this year. They've slotted into that 4th playoff spot last season, although having a 13-20 record. Eastlake coming off a dominant first win of the season, I believe, against El Paso High. Eastlake missed the playoffs last year in 1-6A basketball, but again, I think going to be a lot more competitive. And this was a pretty solid game. Chapin more or less stayed competitive, but really, I think the big thing here was they couldn't match Eastlake's 3-point shooting, and Chapin is still down a few players, especially at the guard position. Daisy Urenda, who is playing on the volleyball team, who was not back yet. I think when she gets back, this team is going to be much improved. And unfortunately, and I already reported this or talked about this on Twitter, and maybe my last Substack post, that Jada Martin Lewis, the transfer from Andrews High School, one of the top cards in the Borderland, was rolled ineligible due to the 365 transfer rule. It's really unfortunate. The transfer rule is highly punitive, in my opinion, overly assessed, and also it's not equal in the way that it is assessed, and who is deemed eligible, who isn't. And in some cases, it's about the timing, and it's about who you know. And so unfortunately, that didn't work out for Chapin, and they're losing one of their best players. But Jada, she's a junior, so she'll be back for her senior year. But it was just obvious watching this Chapin team missing some key guards that I think would have mightily helped throughout this game. But it was really hard for them to overcome the 3-point shooting. Defensively, both teams, or offensively rather, both teams kind of got stuck in the mud in the second half. But by that point, Eastlake already opened up close to a double-digit lead. So the game got a little slower, a little more stuck in the mud in the second half. But really impressed with what Eastlake has going on there, and Marley Webb, that head coach. They have a trio of really talented undersized guards, starting with Karina Ramos Jurado, Ari Galvan, and then Avani Valdez. All 3 undersized, around 5'1", 5'2", overlapping skill sets. Galvan, Jurado are really good 3-point shooters, have extended range. If you give them the space or the opportunity to shoot, they're going to take it. And they're pretty capable from the perimeter. Valdez is a little bit more of a table-setting point guard, not as aggressive looking for her shot from the perimeter, but really fast on the ball, really smooth, good passer. And, sometimes you would think when you have 3 similar players with overlapping skill sets that might be hard to put on the floor, but It really isn't. And when all three of those girls are on the floor together for Eastlake, you really get a really dynamic, dangerous, perimeter-oriented offense. And just kind of thinking about like a team like Americas and those girls, they start a trio of smaller, undersized guards, and they don't really have any trouble fitting in with each other. They have such great team chemistry over there. And I think you're seeing a lot of the same with this Eastlake team. And the good thing about them is that they have Jurado, they have Galvan, they have Valdez, they have a few other guards too, and a guard on the JV squad who I think will be up on the varsity team maybe next season or 2 seasons from now. But the point being, this team in a year is probably going to have some of the best guard depth that the borderline has to offer with respect to an America's team on the girls' side. But really encouraged with where I think this Eastlake team is going. They fight hard. They're really competitive. Really a lot of good, strong ball pressure. Again, Jurado, Galvan, Valdez. Really, they're kind of pests defensively. And they just kind of compete really hard on both ends of the floor. So they're going to make that fight for that 4th playoff spot in 1-6A basketball really interesting. I think, of course, Eastwood, Pebble Hills, Franklin, those are the kind of the 3 teams in whatever order you want to put them that you would just assume, kind of based on last year and the returning talent that they have, are going to be probably the top 3 teams. We'll see, though. But that 4th spot with Eastlake, Montwood is going to be really interesting up for grabs. Again, I think Coronado is going to be an improved team. So the teams from last season at the bottom half of 1-6A basketball are much more improved. So even with the loss of Americas, which is a huge loss for 1-6A basketball, I think as a whole, girls 1-6A basketball is actually going to be even better this season because you still have those 3 really top teams in Pebble Hills, Eastwood, and Franklin. But again, Montwood will be much improved. Eastlake will be much improved. Coronado looks like they're off to a better start as well. So, 1-6A girls basketball, come district play when all the teams are healthy, they have their full rosters. It's going to be a fun battle to see who ends up in those top 4 spots. But yeah, in this game, Chapin missing some key players, especially at the guard positions. I think when they get Urenda back, that will mightily help this team. But I just think the trio of guards that Eastlake has, the 3-point shooting, the on-ball pressure, it really just Chapin really struggled to get into their offense and to get quality looks in the half court. And it was really just, especially in the first half, the 3-point shooting of Galvan and Jurado really separated this game early on. And then it was just really Eastlake holding on to that lead for the remainder of the game. But it was still competitive, still a good game, even though it was low scoring. And ultimately, these teams in a month or so are going to be a lot better. Okay, so moving on to the game of the week, Burges at Riverside. So Burges came into the game 1-0 with a close, low-scoring competitive win over Socorro. Riverside, they opened their season, I believe, against, was it Pebble Hills? And they lost a tough opening game against Pebble Hills. No faults in that. Pebble Hills is an excellent squad. This was a really competitive game. So again, a double-digit win for Riverside, but this was a very close game. They came out early and established a pretty big lead. Burgess, I would say, had some defensive lapses early in the game. Riverside had a lot of good, easy, clean baskets because of that. But once Burgess got settled a bit more, they had a really big second quarter, scored 19 points. And, really so much of what they did went through their top 2 players, Danae Gonzalez and Alyssa Morales. They scored 36 of Burgess's 46 points. In their season opener, Danae Gonzalez scored 32 of Burgess's 36 points. I believe Morales did not play that game. So this is a team also that is missing key starters and talent. Cameron Morales is another one who's missing, I believe, because she's still in volleyball season. Once they get her back, I think that will mightily help. So it was really kind of a game, at least in terms of Burges offensively, really emphasized and played through their top two players, and it really came down to how many shots could Gonzalez and Morales make to keep Burgess into the game. And for Riverside, they have a really solid top four of Hazel Velez, Yasmin Rios, AJ Alvarado, and Jocelyn Castro. Well-distributed shooting, scoring on that team. So a much more balanced team for Riverside. And I really think the big difference here in this game, because at times it looked like, okay, Burgess, once Gonzalez and Morales started to get it go, especially from the three-point line, that maybe their talent might put them ahead and get them this win. But really the big difference here was Burgess really struggled against Riverside's press. And Riverside's height and length really gave this Burgess squad some difficulties. Burgess turned over the basketball quite a few times. Again, though, it's early season. You kind of expect that. They don't have their full roster back. They're down a really important key guard. And I think if they had Cameron Morales, does the result drastically change? Does Burgess win the game? Who knows? That's not easy to say. But this game is not decided by 12 points. I can say that confidently. But the press, Riverside's height, really gave this Burgess squad a tough go at it. And it just kind of seemed like Burgess ran out of gas at the end of it. Alyssa Morales is still coming back from injury. She's not fully 100%, so she was playing through some pain at some times. Janae Gonzalez is just nonstop effort on both ends. And there's a lot put on her in these first two games. Again, with a roster that is not fully intact and back. And you just have a Riverside squad that I think has a little more depth. They're missing some players too, but their core four players returning from last season were all on the floor. They've been playing together throughout the preseason with each other. So in terms of team chemistry and just shot and scoring distribution, they're a little bit more primed and ready for this game. But nevertheless, it's a big win for Riverside, beating a team that was phenomenal in 1-5A basketball last season. And Riverside, they've put together a really good, strong, competitive slate of non-district games against some of the top teams in the Borderland, Burges being one of them, Pebble Hills. I believe they're going to play Eastwood twice, and I think they have another team on their schedule that's pretty good. Really impressed with Hazel Veloz. She scored a game-high 22 points, and she kind of really did it in a, how do I put it, in just kind of this nonchalant way, if you will. And I guess what I mean by that is that she didn't force any shots. The 22 points kind of snuck up on me when I checked the box score on it. Doesn't force her shot, plays within the flow of the offense, is just a really smart, intelligent point guard who just, understands that she plays with other really talented players, and she just takes advantage of her opportunities. So really great game for Veloz. Yasmin Rios finished with 12 points. I was really impressed with AJ Alvarado. I've watched a lot more tape on this Riverside team, and players like Veloz, Rios, Alvarado, Castro. But Alvarado, really impressed with what she can do as a finisher down low. Very confident, very smooth, very relaxed, doesn't panic when she gets the ball in the interior, doesn't force shots. But defensively, plays with high hands. Doesn't leave her feet when players are putting up shots against her. Really, really solid at just using her height, using her length at about 6 feet, 6'1", and just high hands, playing tall, doing all the kind of fundamental things that you need to do as a rim protector, and not just chasing blocks and getting out of position for rebounds. So although she didn't score in double digits, I believe, really impressed with what AJ did for this Riverside squad. And again, they're going to be the class of 2-4A basketball. They have a lot of height, a lot of returning talent that is going to bode well for them when they get into district play. And yes, although Burgess is down some key important players, they still beat a really good team with some really, really talented guards. Because Gonzalez and Morales, they're really good at scoring in bunches, and they're really good at making difficult shots too. And again, there were times throughout this game when Gonzalez and Morales started to get it going, and you kind of think, okay, the tide's starting to turn. The more talented team on paper in terms of their top two players, they're probably going to come away with this or stretch out a lead, and it never really happened. Riverside responded really, really well, and their depth, their chemistry, their top four really took them. And again, just a really consistent scoring output each quarter, 15, 13, 14, 16. So really impressed with what I saw from Riverside. And I'm excited to see how they do, against some of the rest of the top competition that they have slated for non-district play. So that's more or less it for the girls' side. Now let's get into some of the top games for the boys' side for this upcoming week. So my top matchups from week 1 of boys high school basketball, I actually have 6 games, all happening on the 8th of November. So starting with Coronado at Canutillo. Again, I think this Coronado team is going to be much better. They really struggled in 1-6A play last season, but they got some key returning talent. And if that talent can stay healthy, and they got a key incoming transfer from Franklin High School, Jaciel Herrera, who's really special. They have a lot of just really good players at the guard position, and they're going to play a Canutillo squad that was pretty solid down in 1-5A. So just on paper, to me, this is kind of a coin flip matchup, at least in terms of what I expect with Coronado being improved and Canutillo kind of being steady with where they're at from last season, even though they lost some pivotal senior talent. But they still got guys like Donovan Mosier, Austin Bonilla, Giovanni Ortiz. So they still got some players there in Canutillo, and they're at home. So I think that should be a close competitive battle. We have Hanks going to Eastlake. Hanks lost their best player from last year, but they got key return talent, got good size, got good athletes. They got a good transfer from Mountain View named Matthew Salcedo. And Eastlake, I think, is going to be one of the upper echelon teams in Borderland basketball this year. They got a really dynamic backcourt and trio of guards in Tristan Anderson, Diego Diaz, and senior Derek Mendez, and then a 6'4", 6'5" wing, Braden Quigley, who will probably play at the 3 or 4 position for this team. And, just a lot of other interesting pieces on this Eastlake team, like Jeremiah Jones, Mark Ramirez, who's coming up for varsity for the first time. So I think this Eastlake team is going to be really good, but Hanks will be a good test to see what that looks like. And again, it's early season, so some of these results, might not be indicative of where these teams end up. But again, I think that's going to be another good game. Pebble Hills is going to Chapin. So, Pebble Hills lost some key players from last year. Mark Barajas, Nick Sapien, 2 solid players in the backcourt, but they do have CJ Carino returning. CJ Carino, in my estimation, is one of the more talented guards that we have in the Borderland. He's, had a spell of injuries that have kept him out, but he seems to be healthy going into this season. And what a better way to see where a player is at going against the best team in the Borderland in this really stacked Chapin team. And it's going to be an interesting season for Chapin with new head coach Tevin Caldwell to see how they play. I did find out that one of their key players who was potentially maybe a starter, Xavier Stewart, he'll be out for the season. He tore his ACL, and which is unfortunate. I think he was going to have a really big season for Chapin. He's a junior wing, really athletic. In the spot minutes that he played last season for the Huskies, really made his bones defensively. So some of the depth kind of getting shortened for the Chapin squad, but I think what that means is you're going to see more of Carlos Puente, more of Messiah Wilson, more of Keyshawn Lawrence. So they have the depth to replace somebody like Stewart, but it will be interesting, I think, just in the long term of the season, because I think he would have been a pivotal player for them, especially on the defensive end in pressing situations. But it'll be an interesting first game for both teams. We have Burges going to Parkland. So these are two teams that struggled last year, Burges in 1-5A, Parkland, and I think both teams are going to be better. Whether both sides make the playoffs in their respective districts is still up for grabs. I think Parkland in 2-5A, even with the Medicas and El Dorado coming down, still has a chance to do that. They have some talents. I got to see them in kind of like a part 1.5 of the Jamboree Showcase about a week and a half ago. So they got some players down in Parkland, and that's a program that doesn't stay dormant for long. They'll have some down seasons, but they'll come back. Burgess is a team I think that is on the rebound, but they're not without talent. They have some interesting players like Mikey Eason, obviously Anthony Rubio, who's a really talented scoring wing, one of the more talented scorers that we have. But if there's more structure that's put around this program, hopefully this year, if they compete a bit harder, especially on the defensive end, there's talent on this Burgess squad. So I'm interested to see how they start their season. You have San Elizario going to Bowie High School. San Eli was a solid team last year. I believe was just a game or two short of 20 wins. Bowie, of course, were the 1-4A district champions last season and really just ran through 1-4A basketball after a slow start. Bowie is a team that has a lot of football talents on their team, like Johan Camacho. So who knows if this team comes in with, a fully healthy roster. But I think in terms of two teams from the lower districts, I think that's a pretty good matchup with San Eli and Bowie. And then lastly, I have Ysleta at Cathedral. So Ysleta moving down to 2-4A. They have Isaiah Thompson. They have Jaden Herrera, some other players. But Thompson, of course, is going to be the class of 2-4A basketball. He was one of the top scorers in the borderline last year, playing in 2-5A. That shouldn't change this year. And Cathedral was a pretty respectable private school team last year. Again, private schools in terms of their strength of schedule, it's not very good, if we're being honest, but they did have some talent, some graduating. So, I think it will be an interesting matchup between these two teams. Just let it go into Cathedral, one of the best players in the borderline, and Thompson matching up against a fairly respectable private school squad in Cathedral. So those are the top matchups from week 1 on the boys side. I'm interested and excited to get both sides going on the girls side, on the boys side. Some of the lower level districts starting a little bit later. And then, of course, we don't have basketball in Las Cruces and southern New Mexico starting until next month. So we won't be 100% ready to go in terms of all borderland teams playing, but we're getting there. And now we got the boys and the girls side going. In terms of how I'm going to try to cover this, at least for pre-district play, I'm probably going to go watch more girls teams than I am boys teams. There will be sometimes some exceptions where I'll be seeing the boys side of some boys games over the girls games, but I'm going to spend more time on the girls side simply because I'm playing catch up this year. I already have a year of watching some of these boys teams, some of these prospects in person on tape. And although I've done my best to watch as much tape on the girls teams, I need to go watch them play a little bit more in pre-district play. And then, of course, once we get to district play, that will get settled because, I'll be watching both teams play on the same night. So we won't have that issue. But just so, people understand, hey, why are you going to more girls teams? You said you're trying to strike an even balance, and I am. But to even out that covers that balance, I kind of need to make up for not covering the girls side last season. So, I know next week I'll be at the Chapin and Eastwood boys game, but for the most part, I think I'm going to be watching the girls play a little bit more before district play. Now, last thing that I want to get to today, some exciting news in terms of content that I will be putting out on my Substack as part of my coverage of basketball in the borderland is called the Land Profiles. The Land Profiles are going to be a series of feature stories, an in-depth look at some of the top prospects that we have in the borderland. I'm going to be starting with players from the class of 2025. I'm prioritizing them simply because, this is their last season. And I want to make sure that they get as much shine and coverage and exposure as they possibly can. So the first slate of features that are going to come out are going to be on the top 2025s on the boys and the girls side. And as always, for every boys feature that I do, I'm going to do a girls feature. We're going to have some good photography to go along with these feature stories. Have a photographer who's set up, who's going to help me work through this stuff. So it's going to be really good written content, visual content in terms of the photos as well. So I really think that this is going to be a good addition to some of the content that I'm producing. And just to give a better insight into who these prospects are, not only as players, excellent players, obviously, but just as young adults or turning into becoming young adults, young people, because regardless of whatever the talent level is here, we have a lot of really just high character kids with, I think, some interesting stories that I think will be, interesting to read about, hear about, talk about. But really just that's what it is at its core, just a lot of high character kids that I think are, whatever they do in life, they're going to have a lot of success and represent their schools very well, but the city of El Paso and the borderland region very well. So really excited to get those going. The first two stories will be out at the end of this month. Hopefully in 2 weeks or so. If not, I'll get them in right before the end of November. And that's kind of the pace, more or less, I'm going to go at. With these stories, I'm going to try to have 2 out per month. Again, one on the boys' side, one on the girls' side. So you can expect the first 2 features out on my Substack by the end of this month. And of course, I'll push them out on my Twitter page. And of course, I'll talk about them more on this podcast as well. But it's really excited to produce these. I think they're going to be really quality in terms of the content that is being produced, and hopefully, they're well read and supported and shared. So really excited for that to come out. That being said, that should do it for today's episode. So a little bit of a mixed bag, talking about various things, going over various things. I will be out of town this weekend, so unfortunately I'm going to miss the opening slate of boys basketball games. I'll do my best to try to keep up with it. And, probably the last message that I can send, if there's any coaches or parents that, watch this show, if you have full game tape, if you publish full game tape, whether that's on Huddle or if that's on YouTube, wherever you post it, if it's public and you can make it available, please let me know. I really don't rely on highlights, 90-second highlight clips of games to do my scouting. I like to watch full game tape. And I try to find it wherever I can get it. But if you have full game tape available, or if you're willing to share it, please get in contact with me. DM me on Twitter. My DMs are open for everybody, coaches, players, parents, fans. If you just want to, say what's up, share some comments on my most recent content. But if you have some game tape available, I would greatly appreciate it. If it's accessible and if it's available, shoot me a DM. I would love to view it. But yeah, that should do it for today's episode. As always, this is The Land. I'm Javier Cortez. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next time.